Hello everybody, my name is Jared and welcome back to my channel. We're going to continue our discussion about Dead Like Me. We are on episode 7. This episode is called Rite of Passage. It's interesting because I've watched these episodes like 15, 20 times, and going back through and watching it again with a more magnifying glass type of eye and looking at these more deeply, it's interesting how I'm feeling so emotional after watching each one. So Rite of Passage is an important moment in somebody's life, and for all of our Grim Reapers in this story, they've all had their big moments. You know, they all died. They all have kind of processed through that in their own ways. Some of them are still dealing with it. In the previous episode, it kind of addressed purgatory, and in this episode we still kind of see some of the effects of what happened in the previous. And what is interesting about this one is we get some important lore pieces, but we're also seeing how each one of the characters are still responding to death, and we see that in very interesting ways with each one of them. I want to start with the Lasses and kind of bookend both of them with the Lass family. Last episode, Joy didn't have any money to fix the roof, and Reggie suggested that she reach out to her mom, which is Grandma Phil. And in this episode, we actually get to meet Grandma Phil. She is this really eccentric woman. She's really fun. She and Joy clearly have a dynamic that just doesn't work with each other. There's a lot of tension there that is so evident. And with this character, she shows up at the house. She's there to do her own inspection on the roof. She brings Hot Hank with her, and they check the roof out, and she's like, this is how much he'll charge to fix it. And she ends up taking Reggie to George's death site because she feels it's important for Reggie to have this connection moment with places that George has been. And Joy even comments at one point that her version of the healing process is kind of bonkers. It's very clear that Phil is really spiritual in her own way. When they get to that death site, Joy is there, and she appears to spend some time there. And there's this really beautiful visual shot where Joy is just sitting there watching as time passes by, and she's just kind of taking in the atmosphere when Reggie and Phil show up, and Reggie's like, I've never been here before, I just want to be here. When they go home later, Phil and Joy are talking about the loss of George and how devastating that is for Joy, that she lost her daughter. And they parallel that with how Phil is feeling about Joy, with Phil also losing Joy at some point. And we don't know much about that relationship right now, but that will be explored very soon. And there's this dynamic that's happening where we can see Joy as she's continuing to kind of break down all these layers that she's been building up throughout her marriage with Clancy, that now that she's getting to this point with her mom, she's in a very vulnerable state. And we're seeing her mom swoop in at kind of the worst time in Joy's life, and the way that Joy kind of lashes out is very natural and organic seeming for her as a character. And it's interesting to see where this goes going forward. And in the next couple episodes, I'm excited to look at that dynamic because there's a lot to unpack with that relationship. So following this theme of spirituality, we'll move on to Daisy, who in the last episode, Roxy was harassing her about returning the cross that she stole from the old woman in the first episode. Daisy is given an assignment, and she goes back to the church that she was at in the previous episode where Father Matthias is. He is broken. He's clearly very sad, and he's in a bad place right now. And he tells Daisy that essentially he's lost his faith. He feels like there's no afterlife. All there is the now, and then we rot. And he doesn't feel anything about his faith anymore. And Daisy reveals that she can regenerate by stabbing herself in the hand. And she goes on to tell him that she's a Grim Reaper and that she has spent her entire afterlife seeing that there's something more. And her entire death has taught her that there's something else beyond what is just happening on this earth, but she just doesn't know what it is yet. Tapping into that conversation that she had in the previous episode of saying that she's waiting for something, she just doesn't know when it's going to get there, And I think that's her way of saying that she's ready for her lights. She ends up restoring this man's faith, and he promptly dies. After he dies, she takes her cross off and she leaves it there with him. And Rube shows up and has this fatherly moment with her. And she says, you know, he was a priest. He should have had this huge fanfare. It should have been golden lights. There should have been so much more. It should have been more glamorous. And Rube tells her that, you know, death happens and it is what it is. And he tries to have this moment with her, but Daisy still has all these walls up with Rube, and Rube asks if she found what she was looking for, and clearly she hasn't. What she's waiting for is not going to come anytime soon. She's struggling with that, and in the end of the episode, when she sees Mason and she kisses him, which is weird because we've been getting these hints that there's something more with that relationship, that Daisy wants to push there. She wants to go there with Mason, but she also won't let herself. And she tells him afterwards, don't make more of it than what it is. And he tells her, don't worry, I won't, which is very out of character for Mason. Normally that'd be something he would jump at and be like, hey, do you want to go back to my car? Like, we can make this happen now. But I think they both recognize in each other how similar they are, that they're both very sad and broken about what happened in their life and their death, that kind of rite of passage, that they both are waiting for something more. They're just not sure when it's going to happen. Like Mason said in the last episode to the rock star, he was chasing a permanent high and he still hasn't really gotten that high yet. And immortality is not what he thought it was going to be. Daisy always kind of wanted to be immortal too, you know? She wanted to be a movie star. She wanted to be famous. And so far, it's not what it was cracked up to be. She thought it was going to be so much more. And they're both seeing that in each other, which is why I think when she said, don't make more of it than what it is, and he was like, don't worry, it's because they're both kind of seeing eye to eye. Just fascinating. With Mason, he is really upset at the beginning of this episode because George gets a very important person reap. He's mad because he feels like he deserves it. But as we've been seeing through every single episode, Mason constantly is screwing up. He's constantly doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. And this episode is no different from the others. He ends up getting the sloppy seconds, and he has to get somebody else in the same location that Georgia has her important person reap. And it turns out that this person is kind of a major character within George's arc. So I'll get there in just a little bit. He interacts with this group of like gothic punk rock stars, and they're very obsessed with death. They get also revealed in the same way that Daisy revealed to the father about her being a Reaper. Mason also reveals to them that he's a Grim Reaper, but he kind of plays it off like he's joking and that he's kind of just messing with them. At the end, he tells all of them they need to move on and find something else to be interested in, because death is not that interesting. They're very fascinated with death until it actually happens, and when Janine shoots Kyle, they panic and they're no longer fascinated by death. And it was almost their rite of passage to learn that this might not be the thing for them. And when Mason goes back to their Waffle House, he even admits to Rube, I know I messed up. I know I did a bad thing. And he promises to try to be better in the future, but we all know that he's gonna keep messing up. And Rube has this fatherly moment with him, like he had with Daisy, and he offers his pie. And Rube almost never offers up his desserts or his treats. He sometimes will do this for George, and he'll share things with her. He'll order her a bowl of ice cream. He'll order her a slice of pie. And this particular piece of pie, Tiffany saved for him because he's her very important customer, and he offered it up to Mason. And we're seeing a softer side of Rube right now that we're going to continue seeing. A couple episodes ago, we saw how distracted he was by his little piece of mail that he got, and we're seeing that kind of fleshing out and how that is affecting Rube. Moving on to Roxy. Roxy has a very important but also a very small role in this episode. Basically, Rube begs her to help out with George because it's the first time that she's getting a Viper, and he knows that Roxy can be relied upon in ways that Daisy and Mason can't. And Roxy's really the only one that Rube truly relies on. He always knows that George is gonna get the job done, but I think he's still a little wary about her motives because of how she acted in season 1. And he knows that he can trust Roxy, and so he begs her to help, and she says that she's not going to, which she ends up helping anyway. Because Roxy has a soft spot for all of them, and she just hides it really well. She helps George, she helps pick an outfit for her, which admittedly looked very good. George looked really incredible during the whole Unplugged live session. Roxy gives her a police escort to the concert and ends up having to shoot Janine, the killer, at the end of the episode, which Roxy is very shaken up about. She even tells Rube, you know, she had to kill somebody, and she's got this look on her face like she doesn't know how to process this. George teased during her segment that reaping doesn't really feel bad because you're just doing a job, but when you have to constantly search for somebody, or when you're trying to force the tap to happen, it feels like murder. And I think that is what they were trying to parallel with Roxy, is that she normally is just very disconnected with the idea of death, but this time she was the one who shot somebody and caused their death. And I think trying to justify that with her fake job, which is being a cop, and her real job, which is being a Grim Reaper, having to connect those pieces together was difficult for her. And Rube has, again, another fatherly moment with her and tells her that she was just doing her job, and he thinks that she did a great job and she did what she had to do. So that leaves us with George. In the beginning of the episode, she's talking about how there are millions of stars in the sky, and she wonders why just one gets to be important. Like, why did that one get to be picked to be a part of the Big Dipper? It's paralleling stories that are happening later, obviously with Kyle Lower Deck, but also with herself. She has this conversation throughout the entire episode of what makes one person more special than somebody else, what makes one situation more important than others. And that's exactly what happened with Georgia, is that she gets this Viper, this very important person, Reap, for Kyle Lower Deck, who's this well-known singer, and all of the other Reapers are mad that she got it. Roxy thinks she's too young. Daisy thinks that it's unfair because she's been working so hard. Mason feels it's unfair because this is a rock singer and he should get the Reap. And Georgia was picked to do something more special than the rest of them. And this is kind of a defining moment for her as a character, because we've seen Georgia have her slip-ups and her mistakes, but we've been seeing her do better and better and better at her job. And clearly somebody at the top thinks that she's doing well enough that she can handle this. At Happy Time, we meet a ongoing character who we haven't seen since the first episode, or at least we haven't seen this actress. The character is Misty. Pretty sure she wasn't the same character in episode 1, but she was the woman in the bank. And I always thought that was interesting that they had this actress in episode 1, and then a year or so later they were like, hey, remember that one time that you were in the bank and you had like 2 lines? We want to bring you back and give you an ongoing character role for like 5 or 6 episodes. How does that sound? And she's like, sure, I liked the show. So Misty's introduced. She has a big obsession with Kyle Lower Deck, and Georgia goes to talk to Dolores about how she's got to go to this rock concert. And Dolores has my favorite quote of the episode, which I'll get into in a little bit, but we start to see the first piece of Dolores's ongoing arc of her being on this website called love.com, and she's trying to find somebody and she just is having no luck. And when Millie tells her that she wants to go to a rock concert, Dolores is like, you know what, just go, have fun, enjoy life. And it kind of also opens up this door of sexuality that hasn't really been addressed before. Misty unzips her shirt and shows Millie her tattoo of Kyle Lower Deck in a heart, and Dolores catches Millie trying to zip her shirt back up, and Misty's tits are just out to the wind, and Millie's like, I'm not a lesbian. And Dolores is like, don't worry, we've all done it. We've all experimented. And she has this whole monologue about sexuality. And at the rock concert, the friend Janine of Kyle Lower Deck is, you know, kind of being a little flirtatious with George and offers her some lip gloss. And there's like this whole little lesbian subplot that's brought up. But also George just starts talking about sexuality and how rites of passage can sometimes be even losing your virginity. It's very clear that Janine is not happy about who Kyle's dating. I think this same type of plot was used in another TV show around that time, because I have a very distinct memory of something similar in a television show, and I can't remember what it was. Not that it resulted in somebody getting shot, but just like the best friend, maybe it was CSI, like the best friend of the rocker who was scorned. Maybe it did end up with somebody getting shot, so maybe this was a parallel to something in CSI. I'd have to go back and watch old episodes to remember, but anyway, Janine is very clearly upset about Kyle's girlfriend. She's very controlling, and what ends up happening is that Janine shoots Kyle during his performance, which ironically he's singing about wanting to die and wanting to die young, and then Janine goes to shoot the girlfriend, and she clearly went in with a motive of killing Kyle and the girlfriend and just ending this whole part of her life that had caused her so much pain, but Roxy had to shoot her. Janine ends up dying. We see Mason just struggling because he messed up again. He didn't get to the person that he was supposed to in time, and now Janine's gonna go to the afterlife with a huge bullet wound through her chest. And Georgia did a very good job with getting Kyle. Obviously having a celebrity reap presents its own challenges, but she did a good job. Kyle asks her afterwards, because there's this huge candlelight vigil that's happening. He asks her if everybody gets that. And he's so clearly deluded by this world, this bubble that he lives in, that he's never stopped to consider that other people don't have the same type of reality that he lives in. He mentions to her at one point that he doesn't even know why he was chosen to do this television live. He almost implies that he doesn't understand why he was given the talent that he has and why people love him so much, and that it's so much responsibility, which echoes how Georgia has always been feeling about herself, and how she's especially felt in the last episode about getting all that responsibility from Dolores with Lunateca. Georgia kind of just tells him, like, not everybody gets this. You're kind of special. Don't know why. And it does these mirroring shots of her talking about how not everyone gets a candlelight vigil while the lasses are at home lighting candles for George. And she again talks about how one star is more important than the rest of them. But then Grandma Phil says during this whole monologue that the world lost George. It wasn't just the last family. Everybody lost her. And it shows these interesting parallels of maybe one person appears to be more special than the rest, but every person that dies is just as important. And Rube even tells Tiffany when she sees the candlelight vigil, who died? Somebody important died? And Rube says, today, tomorrow, every day of the week, because every soul that dies is important. Georgia is obviously doing a good job, and she is doing better than the rest of them, and they're not too happy about it. But it's because, as I talked about in the previous episode review, they're kind of stuck in their own problems, and they haven't figured out how to get out. And George is figuring that out slowly. She's figuring out what she needs to do to kind of get out of that whirlpool of her own little purgatory, and that's why she's getting recognized. That's why she's getting picked to do more things and given more responsibility, even in her day job at Happy Time. And when the other Reapers start to figure that out, and that they are also important and just as important of stars in that constellation, they'll get picked to do more things too. And there's this interesting parallel that they do with Daisy. While Georgia is talking about why is one person important, she's standing outside of the concert and just watching the vigil happening, and she walks away, and she's just so sad about what happened with the father dying. Is almost like, why did Georgia get the important reap that she should have deserved because she's been working hard? Why did Georgia get this important thing and she lost her faith? She lost her enlightenment. Why did the father get his enlightenment and she lost it? You know, and Daisy is such a complex character that we're seeing so many more deep parts of, and this episode highlighted that a lot. Favorite quote comes from Dolores, because, you know, Dolores is a quotable gay icon. She's talking to Millie about going out on dates, and, you know, she says, when you're young, man, woman, top, bottom, sex is this big buffet, and you're just a fat man with a fork. But as you get older, it gets harder to find a fork. And she tells Millie to enjoy the buffet. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.